The laughter in the grand hall was a weapon, sharp and dismissive. It wasn't meant for me, of course. I was too far beneath its notice, but it cut all the same, a constant reminder of the chasm between my world and theirs. The autumn equinox feast was the pinnacle of our pack's social calendar, a roaring river of light, music, and power from which I was perpetually stranded on the shore. I clung to the shadows cast by the stone pillars, my thin gray dress doing little to ward off the chill that had nothing to do with the season. Everything to do with my place here. I was Alara of the Mistwood Pack, and Omega, the invisible girl. My stomach clenched with a familiar hollow ache. It had been 2 days. In the hierarchy of the Silver Mind Pack, the strongest in the Northern Territories, Omegas ate last, if there was anything left at all. Tonight, I had dared to hope. With so many visiting alphas and betas from allied packs, the feast was a mountain of plenty. Surely, a few crumbs could fall without anyone caring. I wove through the edges of the crowd, a ghost in my own home. The air was thick with the scent of roasted venison and spiced wine. But beneath it, a wilder current ran, the musky perfume of wolves holding their animal halves in check. A tide of raw power that made my own timid wolf whimper and curl inward. A broad-shouldered beta from the Stone Fang pack didn't even break stride as he bumped into me, sending me stumbling against a cold stone wall. "Watch your step, Omega," he grunted, not even looking back. I just pressed myself flatter against the stone, my heart hammering. My gaze remained locked on the floor. To look up was to invite a challenge I could never hope to win. My fingers found the cool metal of the pendant at my throat, a simple, worn silver disc. My mother's last gift. "Courage is not the absence of fear, Elara," she had whispered, her voice frail, but her eyes burning with intensity I never understood. It is the decision that something else is more important. I never knew what that something else was. For me, survival was the only goal. I finally reached the banquet tables, a sprawling landscape of decadence now in ruins. The alphas had taken their fill, leaving behind a wreckage of half-eaten meats, crushed pastries, and discarded bones. To them, it was refuse. To me, it was a reprieve. I snatched a chipped wooden plate, one the kitchen staff would overlook, and began to gather my supper. A crust of bread hardened at the edges, a few slices of apple beginning to brown, some scraps of meat clinging to a bone. It was more than I'd had in days. My hiding spot was a small alcove hidden behind a heavy, dusty tapestry depicting some long-ago battle. It was my sanctuary, a space barely large enough to curl up in where the noise of the pack faded to a distant hum. I sank to the floor, the cold stones seeping through my dress, and arranged my meager feast before me. That first bite of bread, though stale, was a blessing. I closed my eyes, savoring it, trying to ignore the shame that always accompanied these secret meals. I was so focused on the simple act of eating, on quieting the gnawing in my belly, that I failed to notice the change at first. The cacophony of the hall didn't lessen, but a different quality entered the air. A sudden, profound silence that began at the main entrance and spread outwards like a ripple on a pond. The hair on my arms stood on end. My wolf, usually so subdued, stirred uneasily deep within me, a frantic pulse under my skin. Then I smelled it. Pine needles after a frost. clean, cold air from the highest mountain peaks, and beneath it, a power so immense, so absolute, it made the air itself feel heavy. It was the scent of our alpha king, Kalen. I froze, a piece of apple halfway to my lips, my blood turning to ice in my veins. He never came to these feasts until the very end for a formal toast. Why was he here now? My heart beat a frantic, panicked rhythm against my ribs. He couldn't be here for me. The very idea was ludicrous. I was nothing, a shadow. Yet the feeling of being hunted, of being seen despite my best efforts to disappear, was overwhelming. A tapestry was whipped aside. Light flooded my hiding place, blinding me for a second. I blinked up, utterly exposed, the evidence of my shameful meal displayed on the plate in my lap. And he filled the entire space. Kalen, Alpha King of the Northern Territories. His shoulders seemed to blark out the world. He was dressed in simple, dark clothes, but they did nothing to diminish the sheer dominance that radiated from him. It was a physical pressure, making it hard to draw breath. His eyes, the color of stormy twilight, swept over my alcove, over my hunched form, over the plate of scraps. They were not cruel, but intensely, terrifyingly focused. I wanted to look away, to grovel, to apologize for my very existence, but his gaze held me trapped. He didn't speak for a long moment, his silence more frightening than any shout. Then, his voice, low and resonant, cut through the fragile remains of my composure. "What is this?" The question was deceptively soft. I couldn't form words. My wolf was completely submissive, rolling over in my mind, baring its throat to this apex predator. I had seen him only from a distance in the 5 years since he'd taken the throne after his father's tragic death. Up close, he was more powerful, more intense, more real. "Look at me," he commanded. My body obeyed before my mind could protest. I rose on trembling legs, the plate clattering to the floor, my scraps scattering across the stone. I stood before him, my head bowed, my eyes fixed on his boots. "I said, look at me!" The command brooked no disobedience. Slowly, fighting a lifetime of conditioning, I raised my eyes to his. The contact was like a lightning strike to my system. A jolt of pure, undiluted energy surged through me, and my wolf didn't just stir. She lunged forward, pressing against the confines of my skin with a force that left me dizzy. I instantly dropped my gaze, my breath catching in my throat. "Your name." It wasn't a request. "Ilara," I whispered, the word barely audible. "Ilara of Mistwood." "Ilara," he repeated, and my name in his mouth sounded like a foreign, sacred thing. "Why are you hiding back here?" The truth was a knot of humiliation and simple need in my chest. I am an Omega. This is where I belong. I was hungry. I didn't want to be seen. I was hungry, my king. I finally managed, the admission tasting like ash. I did not wish to disturb the feast. He took a step into the alcove, and the space, already small, became minuscule. He was all I could see, all I could smell. His scent was everywhere, clouding my senses. A low sound rumbled in his chest, not quite a growl, but something ancient and assessing. I flinched, waiting for the derision, the anger. But when I dared another glance, his expression had shifted. The cold assessment was gone, replaced by something I couldn't name, a fierce, burning curiosity. and something else, a flicker of what looked like regret. Before he could speak again, a commotion erupted in the hall. Shouts, the sound of splintering wood, and the sharp metallic scent of fear. The Alpha King's head snapped toward the noise, his body coiling with instant, lethal readiness. "Sire!" A voice sharp with urgency cut through the chaos. "The Shadowfang pack! They're at the gates! They've breached the outer wall!" The Southerners, our enemies, they had attacked during a sacred truce. Kalen's eyes found mine again, and the intensity in them was staggering. In that heartbeat, I saw 1,000 calculations. And then he moved. His hand shot out, his fingers wrapping around my wrist. His grip wasn't brutal, but it was unbreakable, like being held by bands of tempered steel. "Come," he commanded, pulling me from my alcove. "My king, I shouldn't." "You are Pack," he said, his voice cutting through my weak protest as he pulled me into the chaotic hall. "And tonight, Elara of Mistwood, you are under my protection." A crowd parted for him, a sea of stunned and fearful faces. I stumbled in his wake, the stares of the pack burning into me. He moved with a predator's grace through the chaos, pulling me toward the main staircase instead of the fray. At the base of the stairs, he stopped and turned to me. Releasing my wrist, he leaned close, his voice a low, urgent whisper meant only for me. "Listen to me. Go to my chambers. Top of these stairs, down the west corridor, the only door of black ironwood. Lock yourself inside. Do not open it for anyone but me. Do you understand?" I could only nod, my mind reeling. "Run," he ordered, his stormy eyes holding mine for one last, searing second. Then he was gone, turning back toward the sound of battle, his form already beginning to shift, to expand as he moved toward his duty. And I, with the scent of pine and frost clinging to my skin and the echo of his command in my ears, began to run. I didn't know why he had chosen me. I didn't know what was happening. But as I fled up the staircase, away from the howls and a scent of blood, one terrifying thought echoed in my mind. My life of quiet obscurity was over. The king had seen me, and nothing would ever be the same again. My bare feet slapped against the cold stone of the staircase, the sound echoing in the sudden emptiness. The roar of the battle below was muffled here, a distant nightmarish symphony of snarls and shouts. My heart was a wild drum against my ribs, each beat screaming, "Run! Run! Run!" The west corridor was as he had described, a wide, torch-lit passageway lined with banners bearing the silver main crest. It was eerily silent, a world away from the chaos below. The air was different up here, cleaner, colder, and carrying a concentrated version of that powerful scent, pine, frost, and undeniable authority. The door of black ironwood stood at the end of the hall, massive and imposing. It felt alive under my trembling hand, the wood dark and gleaming in the torchlight. I pushed it open, the movement soundless and heavy, and slipped inside, quickly turning the large iron lock. The bolt slid home with a definitive, heavy thud that seemed to shake the very floor. I leaned against the door, my breath coming in ragged gasps, and finally dared to look around. The chamber stole the air from my lungs. This wasn't just a room. It was a domain. A high vaulted ceiling arched overhead, and a massive fireplace dominated one wall. a low fire crackling within, casting dancing shadows across the space. The walls were lined with bookshelves that reached to the ceiling, crammed with more books than I had ever known existed. There were maps spread across a large oak desk, their edges weighted down by polished stones. A sitting area with worn, comfortable-looking armchairs stood near the fire. It was a space of power, yes, but also of thought, of solitude. This was the inner sanctum of the Alpha King, and I, an Omega from the lowest rung of the pack, was locked inside. The absurdity of it made me dizzy. Why? Why send me here of all places? Protection, perhaps? But there were dozens of other more suitable places to secure a vulnerable pack member. I moved away from the door, my threadbare dress feeling obscenely out of place against the rich, dark rugs. I was afraid to touch anything, to leave a trace of my unworthy presence in this sacred space. My reflection caught my eye in a polished silver shield mounted on the wall. A pale, frightened girl with wide, haunted eyes and messy blonde hair stared back. I looked exactly like what I was, an intruder. A sharp, stabbing pain lanced through my chest so suddenly I cried out, doubling over and clutching at my sternum. It felt like a crack had formed deep inside me, a fissure of pure, white-hot agony. My wolf howled in sympathetic pain, a desperate, scared sound inside my head. The pain subsided as quickly as it had come, leaving me gasping and shaken, leaning against the desk for support. What was that? Was I hurt? I checked my chest, but there was no mark, no wound. Shaken, I wandered to the large window that overlooked the main courtyard. Pressing my hands against the cool glass, I peered down. The scene was one of controlled chaos. Torches moved like frantic fireflies, illuminating flashes of fur and steel. I could see the massive, dark form of what could only be Kalen's wolf at the center of the fray, a whirlwind of power and fury. My heart clenched with a fear that felt strangely personal. Hours bled together, marked only by the slow dying of the fire and the gradual quieting of the sounds from below. The battle was moving away or ending. I alternated between pacing the length of the rug, watching the courtyard, and perching on the very edge of an armchair, too anxious to sit fully. The king's words echoed in my mind. "You are under my protection." What did that mean? For how long? What happened when he returned? The answer came with the soft, sure sound of the lock turning. I shot to my feet, my heart leaping into my throat. The door swung open and Kalen stood there, backlit by the torches in the hall. He was in human form again, but the battle clung to him. A long, angry gash marred his cheek, still seeping blood. His clothes were torn and smudged with dirt and soot. His dark hair was disheveled, and his breathing was still a little too quick. He found a fresh, dark tunic, but his feet were bare on the stone, and the wildness of the fight still lingered in his eyes. He looked at me, and that same electric jolt from the alcove passed between us. Stronger now, a live wire connecting us across the room. My wolf pressed forward, not in submission this time, but in recognition. A low, soft whine echoed in my mind. "You're here," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion and something like relief. He stepped inside, locking the door behind him. The finality of the sound made my breath hitch. "You told me to come," I replied, my own voice barely a whisper. He walked to a sideboard and poured a glass of water from a crystal pitcher, drinking deeply. I watched the line of his throat, the way his hand gripped the glass. He moved with a predator's grace, even in his weariness. The Shadowfang delegation? I dared to ask. Gone, for now, he said, setting the glass down. It was a probe, testing our defenses, an excuse for violence. He turned to face me fully, his stormy eyes sweeping over me as if checking for injuries. They will be back. You're bleeding, I said, nodding toward the cut on his face. His fingers came up, brushing the wound. It came away tipped with red. It's nothing. It will heal. His gaze was unnervingly direct. Did you feel it during the fight? A pain. Here, he tapped his own chest, right over his heart. My blood ran cold. How could he know? I gave a slow, hesitant nod. How did you? Because I felt it too, he said, his voice dropping to an intense, confidential tone. He took a step toward me, the beginning of the bond. The word hung in the air between us, immense and incomprehensible. Bond. I knew of mating bonds, of course, the connections between wolves who chose each other. But this was different. It felt predetermined, inevitable. I don't understand, I breathed, taking an involuntary step back. I'm an Omega, the lowest rank. I know my place. Something dark and angry flashed in his eyes, but it wasn't directed at me. Who told you that? He asked, his voice dangerously soft. Everyone. It is the way of the world. Alphas lead, betas serve, deltas work, gammas guard, and omegas? I trailed off, the shame hot on my cheeks. We are the last, the least. That, he said, closing the distance between us with 2 deliberate strides, is a lie, a perversion of the truth, crafted by my father and his followers to consolidate power. He was close now, so close I could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes, could feel the heat radiating from his body. His scent was everywhere, a heady mix of battle, night air, and raw, untamed power. What are you talking about? My voice trembled. In the true old ways, the ways my father tried to erase, Omegas were not the bottom. His voice was low, fervent. They were the balance, rare, precious. A true Omega and a true Alpha are 2 halves of a whole. The Alpha is the sword and the shield, the strength and the will. The Omega is the heart and the soul, the empathy and the connection. One cannot truly rule without the other. It creates an imbalance, a sickness in the pack. My head was spinning. It sounded like a fairy tale, a comforting story for children. But the pain in my chest, the way my wolf responded to him, the intensity in his eyes, it all felt terrifyingly real. Why are you telling me this? I whispered. Because, Ilara, he said, and my name was a caress, a promise, a verdict. You are not just an Omega. You are a true Omega, the first to be born in this pack in 30 years. And I felt your presence the moment I entered the hall tonight. My wolf knew you before I did. The world tilted on its axis. The scraps on the floor, the hiding, the years of hunger and invisibility. It all crumbled under the weight of his declaration. I was not nothing. I was something else, something that had been lost. Something that a king was willing to go to war to protect. The lock on the door was not just to keep danger out. It was to keep me in. And as I stood there, in the heart of his power, with his gaze seeing straight through to the soul I thought was insignificant. I knew one thing with absolute chilling certainty. The girl who hid in alcoves was gone. I just had no idea who or what was going to take her place. The silence in the chamber was thick, broken only by the crackle of the dying fire and the frantic rhythm of my own heart. True Omega. The words echoed in the spacious room, seeming to grow larger and more impossible with each repetition. They felt like a crown made of lead, beautiful in concept, but crushing in reality. I can't be, I finally stammered, shaking my head as if I could dislodge the idea. This is a mistake. You have the wrong person. My entire life was evidence against his claim. The scornful glances, the missed meals, the constant grinding reminder of my lowly status. If I were this precious, rare thing, why had I spent my life in the shadows? Kaelin didn't look away. His intensity was a physical force. It is no mistake. Your mother, Helena of Mistwood, she was a clever, brave woman. She must have known. She must have hidden your nature, even from you, to keep you safe. My hand flew to the silver disc at my throat. My mother's pendant. Her final words. Courage is the decision that something else is more important. Had I been that something else? Had she spent her life hiding me, dimming my light so that no one would see it and snuff it out? The thought was a devastating, beautiful ache in my chest. Your father, I whispered, the pieces of his story beginning to form a horrifying picture. He killed them? The true Omegas? A shadow of profound grief and anger passed over Kaelin's face. He did. He saw them not as balance, but as a threat to his absolute authority. A true alpha bonded with a true omega cannot be corrupted. The bond creates a check, a harmony that prevents the descent into tyranny. His jaw tightened. He murdered the last known true omega when I was a boy. He made the entire pack watch. He called it a purification. A cold horror seeped into my bones. The history I had been taught, the natural order I had accepted, was a lie built on a foundation of blood and fear. A firm knock at the door shattered the heavy intimacy of the moment. Kaelin moved instantly, placing his body between me and the potential threat. "Who is it?" he called out, his voice regaining its commanding edge. "Sire, it's Rydian." A voice from the hall was calm and steady. Kaelin's posture relaxed a fraction. He unlocked and opened a door just enough to reveal a tall, lean man with serious brown eyes and hair the color of wheat. He bowed his head respectfully, but his eyes widened almost imperceptibly when they landed on me, standing there in my shabby dress behind the king. "Report," Kaelin commanded, drawing the man's attention back. "The southern forces have withdrawn beyond the river. We have 8 wounded, 2 seriously. No fatalities on our side. They lost at least a dozen. Their alpha, Vorian, escaped, but we captured 2 of his captains for questioning." Rydian spoke with efficient clarity, but his gaze flickered to me again, curiosity plain on his face. "The perimeter is secure, and the guests have been calmed and sent to their quarters." "And the council?" Kaelin asked, his voice tight. Rydian's expression turned wary. "They are concerned, sire. They've heard reports that you personally escorted an Omega to your chambers during the attack. They are demanding an explanation." So the rumors were already spreading like wildfire. I could only imagine what they were saying. That the king had lost his mind, that he was consorting with the lowest of the low in a time of crisis. My cheeks burned with a fresh wave of humiliation. "The council can wait until dawn," Kalen said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Post additional guards in this wing, discreetly. No one enters without my direct order." "Understood, sire." Rydian hesitated. "And the young woman?" Kalen's voice was firm, final. "Ilara remains under my protection. That is all the council needs to know for now." With a final curious glance in my direction, Rydian bowed and withdrew. Kalen locked the door once more, the sound echoing in the sudden quiet. The brief interruption had made the reality of my situation even more stark. I was not just a secret between the king and me. I was a political problem. Rydian is my beta, my second. He is loyal, but even he does not know the full truth, Kalen explained, turning back to me. Very few do. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice small. "You can't keep me locked in your room forever." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, there and gone in an instant. "No, that would rather defeat the purpose." He grew serious again. "Now you begin to learn. You begin to understand what you are and what it means for our pack, for all the northern packs." He moved to his bookshelves, his fingers trailing over the spines with a familiar reverence. He pulled out a large, ancient-looking tome bound in faded green leather. The cover was embossed with a symbol I had never seen before. A circle with a stylized wolf and a crescent moon at opposite points, connected by a flowing, intricate line. He brought the book to the large desk, carefully opening it. The pages were brittle and yellowed, the script an old form of our language that was difficult to read, but the illustrations were clear. They showed pack structures not as rigid pyramids, but as interconnected circles, with the alpha and omega depicted as equal, balancing forces. "This is one of the few texts that survived my father's purge," he said, his voice soft with reverence. "It was hidden by those who still believed in the old ways." He pointed to a passage. "It speaks of the true Omega's gifts, empathy so deep you can sense the emotions of the entire pack, an ability to calm aggression, to heal emotional wounds, to forge bonds of loyalty that are stronger than fear. You are the heart of the pack, Ilara. Without a heart, a body may function, but it cannot truly live. It cannot thrive." I stared at the ancient pages, a strange sensation unfurling in my chest. It wasn't quite belief, but it was a dawning, terrifying hope. What if it were true? What if all the things that had made me different, my sensitivity, the way I could always sense the mood of a room, the way animals and young children were drawn to me, weren't weaknesses, but the faint, untrained echoes of a forgotten power? "Why should I trust you?" The question left my lips before I could stop it, born from a lifetime of caution. "You are the king. You could be telling me this for your own reasons, to use me." Instead of being angered, he looked resigned. "That is a fair question, and the only answer I can give you is this. The bond that is forming between us, it cannot be faked. It cannot be forced. It requires trust from both sides. I am asking for your trust, Ilara, not your blind obedience. I have no desire for a puppet. I need a partner." A partner. The word was so foreign, so immense, it was almost meaningless. How could I, Ilara, the girl who ate scraps from the floor, be a partner to a king? As if reading the doubt on my face, he continued, "You felt the echo pain. You feel the pull between us even now. Your wolf recognizes mine. That is not a trick. That is the most real thing either of us has ever experienced." He was right. The connection was a tangible thing, a thread of energy humming between us. When he looked at me, I felt seen, in a way that was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. "What is the price of this?" I asked softly, my fingers once again finding the comfort of my pendant. "If I accept this destiny, the price is your safety," he said without hesitation. "The southern packs, led by Vorian, operate as my father did, through fear and brute force. They have heard rumors that I seek to restore the old ways. They fear what a balanced pack led by a true alpha and true omega could become. They will stop at nothing to kill us both." He took a step closer, his gaze earnest. "The price is also your old life. You can never go back to being invisible, Alara. From this moment on, every eye in the territory will be upon you." The weight of his words settled over me. It was an impossible choice. I could refuse, retreat into the shadows, and likely be killed by the Southerners who now knew of my existence. Or I could step into the light, accept this terrifying new identity, and become the target for every enemy of the crown. I looked around the king's chamber, at the books of forgotten knowledge, at the maps of a kingdom I was suddenly central to. I looked at Kaelin, who watched me with a patience that felt infinite, who offered me a partnership instead of a command. My mother's face flashed in my mind. She had hidden me to keep me safe, but she had also given me her pendant and told me to be brave. She had prepared me for a storm she knew would one day come. The storm was here. I took a deep, shuddering breath, my decision solidifying in the core of my being. I met the Alpha King's stormy eyes, my own voice surprisingly steady when I spoke. "Then teach me." The first light of dawn was a pale, hesitant thing, bleeding through the high window of the small adjoining chamber where I had spent the remainder of the night. I hadn't slept, not truly. My mind was a maelstrom of ancient texts, the king's confessions, and the terrifying, shimmering potential of the word true omega. A luxurious bed with its soft linens felt like a lie, a prop in a play I hadn't auditioned for. A soft knock came at the door connecting to the main chamber. My heart, which had finally settled into a steady rhythm, leapt back into a frantic gallop. Yes, the door opened, and a young woman I recognized slipped in, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and sheer disbelief. It was Liana, a beta from the kitchens. We were the same age, and there had been times, rare and fleeting, when she'd slipped me an extra roll or a piece of cheese when my hunger became too obvious to ignore. Now she looked at me as if I were a stranger, a ghost who had suddenly gained substance. "Ilara?" she breathed, her gaze sweeping over the room, then back to me, still in my wrinkled, simple dress. "Alpha King, he asked me to bring you these." She held out a bundle of fine, dark blue wool and a pair of soft leather boots. She set down a tray laden with food, fresh bread, honey, dried fruits, and a pot of tea that smelled of herbs and mountains. It was more food than I would have seen in a week. "Thank you, Liana," I said, my voice hoarse from lack of sleep and the weight of unshed tears. She just stared, her composure crumbling for a moment. "The whole pack is talking," she whispered, stepping closer. "They're saying the king claimed you during the battle, that he fought like a demon to protect you. They're calling you the Ghost Queen. The name hit me like a physical blow. Ghost Queen. It was poetic and cruel all at once. A specter elevated to a throne no one believed she deserved. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks. "It's not what they think," I said weakly. But the words sounded hollow, even to me. Liana simply nodded, her expression saying she didn't believe me. But her loyalty to the king, and now perhaps the sliver of curiosity about me, kept her from questioning further. "If you need anything, anything at all, I'm to attend to you." She gave a small, awkward curtsy and hurried out. The dress was simple but exquisitely made, the wool soft and warm against my skin. As I fastened the silver buttons, I felt like an imposter. I looked at my reflection in the small mirror. The girl who stared back wore the clothes of a noble, but her eyes were still those of the Omega from the alcove, wide, frightened, and full of shadows. I fastened my mother's pendant around my neck, its familiar weight the only anchor I had in this churning sea. When I emerged, Kalen was waiting. He stood by the large window, his profile etched against the morning light. He had changed into clean, dark trousers and a gray tunic that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. He turned as I entered, and his eyes, those stormy, intense eyes, did a slow, deliberate sweep from my boots to the pendant at my throat. A strange, unreadable emotion flickered within them. "The color suits you," he said, his voice a low rumble. Then, as if catching himself, his expression shifted back to that of the pragmatic king. "The council is assembled. They're waiting." A fresh wave of panic washed over me. "The council? What could I possibly say to them?" "Nothing," he said, moving toward me. "Today, you only need to listen, to observe, to feel the room. It is the first lesson." He stopped before me, his presence both intimidating and strangely steadying. "Are you ready?" The question was so vast it was almost meaningless. Ready to face the wolves who had overseen my life of neglect? Ready to be judged and found wanting? Ready to be the Ghost Queen? "No," I answered, honestly. A faint, approving smile touched his lips. "Good. Honesty is your strength. Remember, you belong here, not because of a title I give you, but because of what you are. Can you hold on to that truth when they try to make you doubt it?" I thought of my mother's pendant. "I will try. That is all I ask." He offered his arm, a formal, courtly gesture that felt both alien and momentous. My fingers, trembling slightly, rested on the firm muscle of his forearm. It was like touching lightning contained in flesh. The walk to the council chamber was a gauntlet. Whispers trailed in our wake like poisonous vines. Wolves of all ranks stopped and stared, their expressions a turbulent mix of shock, curiosity, and open hostility. I saw beta warriors I had spent my life avoiding, their eyes narrowed in calculation. I saw older omegas, their faces etched with a lifetime of submission, watching me with something that looked like fearful hope. I kept my chin level, my gaze fixed ahead, but inside, I was shrinking. The instinct to make myself small and invisible, a screaming chorus in my blood. The council chamber doors swung open, revealing a semicircle of the most powerful wolves in the Northern Territories. 12 pairs of eyes, sharp and assessing, locked onto me. The air was thick with the scent of their combined dominance, a suffocating perfume of power and suspicion. The eldest, a woman with silver hair and eyes like chips of flint, rose, Elder Anya. Her gaze was a physical weight. "My king, we have been waiting." Her eyes slid to me, cold and dismissive. "And this is the Omega?" Kalen's voice was calm, but it carried an edge of steel. "This is Alara of Mistwood, daughter of Helena, and her presence is precisely what we must discuss." He guided me to a seat at his right hand. The gesture was not lost on anyone. Murmurs rippled around the table. I sat, folding my hands in my lap to hide their trembling, feeling like a rabbit surrounded by wolves. For an hour, I listened as they dissected the previous night's attack. The breached wall, the betrayals, the movements of the Southern Army. I said nothing, as Kalen had instructed. I watched, I felt, and I began to understand what he meant about my gifts. I could feel the undercurrents in the room. Elder Anya's rigid traditionalism, the military commander's boiling anger, the fear from the eastern border Alpha. Finally, Elder Anya turned the conversation to the elephant in the room. "Sire," she began, her tone carefully neutral, "the pack is unsettled. Your focus on this young woman during a crisis sends a confusing message. If you seek companionship, there are high-ranking females from strong bloodlines." Kalen cut her off, his voice dangerously soft. "Are you suggesting I choose a mate based on political convenience, Elder Anya, as my father would have?" A tense silence fell. "I am suggesting that stability is paramount in times of war," she replied stiffly. "And this deviation from tradition creates uncertainty." "Some traditions are prisons," Kalen countered, his gaze sweeping the room, "and some truths have been hidden for too long." He paused, letting his words hang in the air. "Alara is not a deviation. She is a return. She is a true Omega." The reaction was instantaneous. Gasps, a slammed fist on the table. "Impossible!" barked the grizzled war commander Goran. "The bloodline was purged." "Not entirely," Kalen said, his voice rising to dominate the room. "Helena of Mistwood hid her daughter in plain sight, knowing my father's butchers would never look for a treasure among what they considered trash." The anger in his voice was not for show. It was real, and it was ancient. I kept my eyes on the table, but I could feel their gazes burning into me, reassessing, recalculating my worth. The disdain began to war with a dawning, wary curiosity. Elder Anya was the first to recover. Her sharp eyes found mine. "You felt the echo pain during the battle?" The question was directed at me. All eyes turned my way. I forced myself to meet her gaze, to nod. "Yes, Elder." A long, slow breath escaped her. The confirmation seemed to age her. The old texts, they speak of it. The bonds first awakening. She looked at Kalen, a new, grim understanding in her eyes. If this is true, then the southern attack was not just a test of our borders. It was an assassination attempt on both of you. The room fell into a stunned silence. Kalen nodded. "Vorian knows the old stories. He knows what a bonded Alpha and Omega would mean for his ambitions. He fears our unity more than our armies." I sat there, in the eye of the hurricane, as they debated my existence, my value, my danger. I was no longer just Alara. I was a symbol, a key, a threat. The Ghost Queen was no longer just a rumor. She was a weapon they were all trying to understand how to wield. Life in the fortress became a strange, suspended reality. I was moved from the king's chambers to a spacious suite of my own, in the same secured wing. My few meager possessions, a second dress, a hairbrush, a small carved bird my mother had given me, looked lost and lonely in the elegant rooms. Liana became my constant shadow, her initial awe settling into a fierce, protective loyalty that both comforted and unnerved me. The pack's reaction was a storm I could feel even through stone walls. The name Ghost Queen stuck, whispered in halls, muttered in the training yards. Some, mostly the young and those who had felt the sharp end of the pack's hierarchy, looked at me with something like hope. Others, their identities built on the old order, watched me with open contempt. My education began in earnest. Mornings were spent in the archives, a dusty, hallowed space deep within the fortress that Kaelin had secretly restored. The air smelled of old paper and forgotten secrets. He would sit beside me, his large frame seeming to make the small study nook even smaller, and guide me through the ancient texts. "See here," he said one morning, his finger tracing a passage in a fragile hand-illustrated book. "It speaks of the Omega's empathy. It's not just about feeling what others feel, it's about understanding the source. A beta's frustration may come from a perceived slight, but an alpha's might stem from a threat to the pack. You can learn to differentiate, to soothe the right wound." As he spoke, I realized I was already doing it. I could feel his own emotions, a constant low hum of concern for the pack, a fierce determination to protect me, and beneath it all, a profound loneliness that mirrored my own. It was an intimacy more shocking than any touch. "My mother," I said slowly, closing the book. "She taught me to be quiet, to watch, to feel the mood of a room before entering it. I thought it was just about survival." "It was," Kaelin said, his voice soft. "The greatest survival skill of all. She was teaching you to use your gift without ever naming it, so no one else would name it either." The afternoons belonged to Damon, the beta who had reported after the battle. Where Kaelin was intense and philosophical, Damon was practical and direct. Our training took place in a secluded courtyard, shielded from prying eyes. "The southern wolves will not fight fair, my lady," he said, his tone respectful but firm. "They will see your connection to the king as a vulnerability. They will target you to break him." He handed me a slender, weighted practice dagger. "You will never match an alpha for strength, so we will not try. Your gift is your greatest weapon." He taught me to use my empathy defensively, to sense the shift in intent before a muscle moved, to project a wave of calming energy, a trick I had unknowingly used my whole life to avoid conflicts. Under his guidance, I learned to focus it, to use it not just to hide, but to create a moment of hesitation in an opponent. "It's like feeling the wind change before a storm," I gasped one day after successfully evading his lunge by sensing the flicker of his movement, a heartbeat before he made it. "Exactly," he said, a rare smile touching his lips. "You are learning to read the weather of a fight." Through it all, the bond with Kaelin deepened in quiet, undeniable ways. The echo pain returned sometimes, not just during danger, but in moments of strong emotion. A sharp stab of frustration from him during a taxing meeting, a sudden, warm surge of pride when I correctly translated a complex passage from the old tongue. It was a constant, humming connection, a thread that tied my soul to his. One evening, about 3 weeks after my world had turned upside down, I found him in his study, staring at a large map of the territories, his brow furrowed. The weight of the coming war was a heavy cloak on his shoulders. I could feel its oppressive weight from the doorway. "You're tired," I said softly, entering the room. He didn't look up, but his posture relaxed slightly at the sound of my voice. "The Western neutral pack is still refusing to commit. Without them, Vorian's numbers will overwhelm us." He finally turned to me, and the fatigue in his eyes was a physical ache in my own body. Sometimes I wonder if I am leading them all to ruin. The confession, so raw and unkinglike, shocked me. I walked over to the map, standing beside him. The scent of pine and frost that was uniquely his wrapped around me, a familiar comfort now. "You are leading them toward a future that isn't built on fear," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "That is not ruin, that is hope." His stormy eyes searched mine, and for a moment the weight seemed to lift. "You see the world differently, Alara. You see the heart of things." He gestured to the map. "What do you feel when you look at this?" I let my gaze drift over the inked mountains and rivers, the marked pack boundaries. I didn't think about strategy or numbers. I just let my empathy drift, imagining the wolves in those far-off places. I felt the stubborn pride of the Western pack, their fear of choosing the losing side. I felt the simmering anger from the South, a collective hunger for conquest that felt sick. The Western Alpha, he is proud, but he is not evil. He is afraid, I said, my finger hovering over his territory. And the South, it feels wrong, Kaylin. It's not just ambition, it's a sickness, a rot. Kaylin stared at me, a new light in his eyes. The old texts speak of that too. An Omega can sense corruption, a poison in the pack spirit. My father's reign had the same taint. He looked back at the map, a new determination setting his jaw. "We must heal the sickness in the north before we can defeat the sickness in the south." In that moment, it wasn't a king and his discovered Omega. It was two people looking at a broken world and wondering how to mend it. The space between us crackled with that shared purpose. He was so close. My wolf pressed forward, a soft, yearning sound in my mind. The moment was broken by a distant, frantic howl from the watchtower. Then another, a chorus of alarms. Kaylin was instantly transformed, the weary leader replaced by the warrior Alpha. "They're here," he said, his voice grim. The peace was over. The lesson was ended. The war had come to our doorstep. As I followed him out of the study, the thread between us pulled taut with a shared dread. I knew my training was over. The fortress, a moment ago a place of quiet study and simmering tension, erupted into a hive of controlled chaos. The haunting melody of the warning howls was answered by the sharp shouts of commanders and the thunder of boots on stone. The scent of fear was sharp and acrid, but beneath it, a fiercer scent rose, the burning determination of wolves defending their home. Kaylin moved like the storm he was named for, his presence a stabilizing force in the turmoil. He barked orders to Rydian, who materialized at his side as if summoned by thought alone. Secure the inner gates. Mobilize the eastern flank. I want archers on the western wall. They'll try to scale it under cover of the main assault. I stood frozen for a moment, the map of territories still burning behind my eyes, the theoretical war now a terrifying reality. The pull to run and hide, to find my old alcove, was a visceral instinct. But as I watched Kaelin, a pillar of strength amid the storm, that instinct crumbled. I was not that girl anymore. He turned to me, his eyes blazing with ferocious intensity. Alara, with me, to the Great Hall. We moved through the corridors, a river of armed wolves parting before us. The air grew thicker with each step, charged with the raw energy of shifting forms and battle lust. As we entered the vast expanse of the Great Hall, the very place where he had found me weeks before, the scene was entirely different. It was no longer a place of celebration, but the nerve center of a pack at war. Wounded were already being carried in, their pained grunts and the coppery scent of blood filling the air. Kaelin ascended the dais at the far end, his voice booming, cutting through the din. "Hold the line! They test our will! Show them the strength of Silvermane!" But I wasn't listening to his words. I was feeling the room. The panic was a living thing, a suffocating fog. A young warrior was clutching a gash on his arm, his fear a sharp, piercing note. An older she-wolf was trying to staunch the bleeding of her mate, her despair a cold, heavy wave. The collective terror was a poison, seeping into the pack's spirit. My own fear was a wild bird trapped in my chest, but beneath it, something else stirred. My gift. It wasn't just about sensing emotions anymore. It was a pressure building inside me, a need to respond, to act. Kaelin's words from the archives echoed in my mind. "You are the heart of the pack." Without thinking, I stepped down from the dais and moved toward the young, frightened warrior. I knelt beside him, ignored the surprised looks. "Look at me," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. He focused on me, confusion warring with his fear. I placed my hand on his shoulder, and I let my empathy flow, not as a passive sense, but as an active force. I pushed past his panic, finding the core of his courage, the part of him that had taken up a blade to defend his home. I fanned that small spark, envisioning it as a warm, steady light. His ragged breathing slowed. The wild terror in his eyes receded, replaced by grim, focused determination. "Thank you, my lady," he whispered. I moved to the she-wolf, offering the same quiet strength, a balm to her despair. I didn't heal their bodies. That was not my power. But I began to heal their spirits. I walked among them, a calm figure in a sea of chaos. My presence, a silent counter-melody to the symphony of fear. I could feel Kaelin's gaze on me, a warm, solid weight amidst the turmoil. His awe, his pride, and his own fear, for me, for his people. The bond between us hummed, a conduit of shared strength. A messenger covered in mud and blood skidded into the hall. "Sire, they've broken through the outer courtyard. They're being led by Vorian himself." Kaelin's face hardened into a mask of cold fury. He looked at me, and in that look, an entire conversation passed between us. "Stay. Be safe. Be their heart. I will be our sword." He leaped from the dais, shifting in mid-air. His clothes tore as his form expanded, muscle and bone reshaping into something immense and primal. Where a man had stood, there was now a colossal wolf with fur the color of a midnight storm and eyes that glowed with ferocious amber light. He was magnificent and terrifying, with an earth-shaking roar that was both challenge and promise. He surged toward the entrance, a tide of his most loyal warriors flowing with him. I stood, my hand pressed against my pounding heart, watching him go. The thread between us stretched, thin but unbreakable. I could feel his rage, his absolute focus. And I could feel something else, too, the dark, oily presence of Vorian. It was the corruption I had sensed, now close and personal, a blight on the air. The battle was no longer a distant sound. It was at our door. Snarls, the clash of steel, and the screams of the wounded echoed from the courtyard. I turned from the door, my own battle clear. I moved back among the wounded and the fearful, my voice soft but firm, my touch of reassurance. The Ghost Queen was no longer a rumor or a symbol. She was a presence. And as I worked, calming a crying child, steadying a trembling elder, I realized the truth. I had spent my life being invisible. But in this moment, as I used my gift to hold the heart of my pack together while its alpha fought for its body, I had never been more seen. And I had never been more myself. It was exhausting. Each act of emotional healing felt like pouring a little of my own spirit out. My head throbbed, and a fine tremor had taken up residence in my hands. But with every wolf whose eyes cleared of panic, with every steadying breath I helped them draw, I felt a corresponding flicker of strength from the bond. Kalen was fighting, and he was drawing on my calm just as I was drawing on his strength. We were a circuit, a complete system. Suddenly, a wave of nausea so violent it doubled me over washed through me. It wasn't pain this time. It was a feeling of profound wrongness, a spiritual vileness that made my skin crawl. My wolf recoiled, whining in disgust. I clutched the edge of a table, gagging. "Alara, what is it?" Leanna was at my side in an instant, her hand on my back. I couldn't speak. I just pointed a trembling finger towards the main entrance. The massive doors were shuddering under the impact of blows from the other side, and Vorian was with them. I could feel him now, not as a distant sickness on a map, but as a concentrated plague just beyond the thick wood. His presence was a black hole, sucking in light and hope, radiating a hunger that was not for territory or power, but for domination and decay. "The door won't hold," a guard yelled, bracing his shoulder against the shuddering wood. Panic threatened to overwhelm the hall. I walked toward the doors, legs unsteady, but will iron. "Stand ready," I called, my voice resonance authority. I stopped a few feet from the door, closed my eyes, and gathered all the courage, love, hope into a brilliant, pure white light. Then I pushed. It was not a physical shove, but an empathic wave, a barrier of pure, defiant spirit. I felt it flow out of me, a ripple of calm and resolution that washed over every wolf in the great hall. The frantic energy stilled. The terrified whimpers ceased. I felt their collective deep breath, their hearts steadying, their resolve hardening. They stood their ground, not as frightened individuals, but as a united pack. The doors exploded inward. Splinters of ironwood flew like shrapnel. Framed in the shattered doorway, surrounded by his brutish warriors, stood Vorian. He was taller than I had imagined, with lank, dark hair and eyes the color of a stagnant pond. His smile was a cruel slash in a handsome, cruel face. The corruption rolled off him in waves, so thick I could almost taste it, like old blood and spoiled meat. His gaze swept the room, dismissive of the armed guards, and landed squarely on me. "Well, well," he purred, his voice oily and smooth. "The little ghost. I must thank you, my dear. Your little light show just now was like a beacon, so much purer and brighter than the rest of this rabble. It makes you so very easy to find." My blood ran cold. He hadn't just sensed me. My use of my power had drawn him straight to me, like a moth to a flame. I had made myself the target. "Vorian," I said, and I was proud that my voice did not shake. "You are not welcome here." His laugh was a dry, rasping sound. "I go where I please, and I have come for what is mine, the true Alpha's head and his little Omega prize." His eyes gleamed with malicious delight. "Kalen thinks he can restore the old ways? I will show him the only way that matters, the way of strength, the way my dear departed friend, his father, understood." He took a step into the hall, and his warriors fanned out behind him. The guards tensed, raising their weapons, but they were outnumbered. The hope I had built was fragile, and it was about to be shattered by cold, hard steel. I stood my ground, my mother's pendant cold against my skin. I could feel Kalen, distant but fighting, a raging inferno of concern and fury through our bond. He knew I was in danger. Vorium took another step, his eyes locked on me. "You will make a fascinating trophy. I wonder what will happen to your precious Alpha when he feels your life snap through that pretty little bond." He was right in front of me now. I could smell his scent, ash and rot. I was defenseless. My empathy was useless against a will so thoroughly corrupted. My practice dagger was a joke against his claws. This was it, the storm my mother had prepared me for. I looked past Vorian, at the faces of my pack. I saw their fear, but I also saw their determination. I saw Liana clutching a kitchen knife, her face set in a snarl. I saw the young warrior I had calmed, standing on his wounded leg, ready to fight. Courage is the decision that something else is more important. I looked Vorian dead in the eye, and I did not flinch. "You can break my body," I whispered, so only he could hear. "But you cannot break what I am, and you cannot break him." For a fraction of a second, his smug certainty faltered. He saw not a frightened girl, but a queen defending her heart. It was the opening we needed. A roar, louder than any that had come before, shook the very foundations of the hall. A massive, midnight black wolf, bleeding from a dozen wounds, but burning with incandescent rage, launched himself through the shattered doorway. Kalen had come. He didn't even glance at the other southern warriors. His entire being was focused on Vorian. He hit the southern Alpha like a battering ram, sending him crashing back through the ruined door and into the courtyard beyond. The battle for the Great Hall was over. The battle for the future had just become a duel between two Alphas. And as I watched my king fight for our lives, the taste of Vorian's corruption still foul in my mouth, I knew one thing for certain. I was not a prize to be won. I was the reason he would not lose. The world narrowed to the two titans clashing in the torch-lit courtyard. Kalen, a storm given flesh and fur, moved with a ferocious grace that was beautiful and terrifying. Vorian, having shifted in the moment of impact, was a hulking, brindled beast with eyes that burned with a sickly yellow light. Their snarls were not just sounds. They were physical blows against the air, vibrations I felt in my teeth. The pack, both inside the hall and those spilling out from the sidelines, formed a grim, silent circle. This was ancient law. Alpha challenging alpha. The outcome would decide everything. I stood frozen in the shattered doorway, my hands clenched into fists, so tight my nails bit into my palms. I was no longer using my empathy on the pack. Every ounce of my being was focused on the thread connecting me to Kalen. I could feel the searing heat of his rage, the sharp, bright flashes of pain as Vorian's claws found their mark, the relentless, driving purpose that was his core. But I could also feel the exhaustion. The battle had been long before this duel even began. Vorian was fresh. He had held back, letting his warriors wear Kalen down. He fought with a dirty, cunning brutality, aiming for old wounds, throwing dirt, feinting and lunging with a speed that belied his size. He was not just trying to win, he was trying to break Kalen's spirit. He feeds on fear. He feeds on despair. The thought cut through my own terror. I was not a warrior. I could not join the fight. But I was the Omega. I was the heart. I closed my eyes, blocking out the horrific sight of tearing flesh and flying blood. I dove inward, down the golden, thrumming thread of our bond. I pushed past Kalen's pain, past his fury, searching for the core of him, the boy who had witnessed atrocities and sworn to be different, the king who carried the weight of thousands. The man who had seen a scared girl in an alcove and recognized a queen. I found it, a well of strength, so deep and pure it took my breath away. It was his love for his pack, his belief in a better way, his hope. It was buried under the layers of battle, but it was there, shining like a diamond in the dark. I poured my own strength into that well. I sent him not just my calm, but my absolute, unwavering faith. I sent him the memory of his own words in the archives. I sent him the feeling of the pack's hope that I had felt in the hall. I sent him the image of a future, of a circle of balance, of a throne that was shared. You are not your father, I thought, pouring the conviction down the bond. You are strength with a conscience. You are power with a heart. You are the sun, and he is just a shadow. Burn him away. In the courtyard, something shifted. Kalen, who had been fighting a defensive, weary battle, suddenly straightened. A new energy seemed to crackle around him. He let out a roar that was different from before. It wasn't just a challenge of dominance, but a declaration of truth. It resonated with the very stones of the fortress, making Vorian hesitate for a single crucial second. Kalen moved. It was a blur of midnight fur and righteous fury. He was no longer just dodging and retaliating. He was the storm unleashed. He met Vorian's next lunge head-on, his powerful jaws closing around the brindled wolf's throat. It wasn't a killing blow, not yet. It was a statement, a claim. They rolled across the cobblestones, a whirlwind of snapping teeth and tearing claws. But the tide had turned. I could feel it. Kalen's movements were sure, precise, fueled by a resolve that was no longer just his own. It was ours. With a final mighty heave, Kalen pinned Vorian to the ground. his massive paw pressed down on the Southern Alpha's chest, his muzzle still locked on his throat. Vorian struggled, his claws scrabbling uselessly against Kalen's shoulders. But the fight was gone from him. The corruption in his spirit seemed to shrink back, defeated by the sheer, unassailable light of Kalen's will. The courtyard was utterly silent, save for the ragged, panting breaths of the two alphas. Kalen released Vorian's throat and shifted back. He stood over his enemy, bloodied, battered, but radiating a kingly authority that was absolute. His chest heaved, and his eyes, when they found mine across the distance, were blazing with a triumphant, grateful fire. "Yield," Kalen commanded, his voice raw but resonant in the silence. "Yield, and your wolves may leave with their lives. Continue, and I will end you, and your pack will be scattered to the winds." Vorian, still in his wolf form, let out a low, defeated whine. He lowered his head, baring his throat in the ultimate sign of submission. The sickness of his presence didn't vanish, but it was cowed, contained. It was over. A collective exhale seemed to sweep through the fortress. Then, a single voice, Rydian's, rose in a triumphant howl. It was picked up by another and another, until the very mountains echoed with the victory cry of the Silvermane pack. I didn't join the howl. My legs gave way, and I sank to my knees in the doorway, trembling from the emotional expenditure. The battle was won. Kalen was safe. But as I watched him, standing victorious over his foe, a new, cold dread began to uncoil in my stomach. Vorian had yielded, but his eyes, as he was dragged away by our guards, held not defeat, but a promise. This was not the end. It was a respite. He had seen my power. He had felt what Kalen and I were together. And he knew now, without a doubt, that to win this war, he wouldn't just need to break the Alpha. He would need to shatter the Omega. The true cost of being the heart was becoming terrifyingly clear. I was no longer just Kalen's strength. I was his greatest vulnerability. Victory, I learned, was not a clean thing. It was a messy, painful, and exhausting business. The fortress, though secure, was a wounded beast. The scent of blood and smoke clung to the stones, a grim reminder of how close we had come to annihilation. The cheers and howls of the night before had faded into the quiet, determined work of rebuilding and mourning. Kalen was everywhere. He moved through the aftermath with a relentless energy that belied his own injuries. He helped clear debris, spoke with every wounded warrior, and oversaw the strengthening of our defenses with a focus that was almost frightening. Through our bond, I could feel the price he was paying. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a deep, thick core, separated from energy, bone-weary ache, and a grief for the lives lost that was a heavy stone in his own heart. He had ordered Vorian and his surviving captains locked in the deepest, most secure cells, guarded by his most trusted wolves. It was a temporary measure. The question of what to do with a defeated but still dangerous Alpha was a political quagmire that would need to be navigated with care. I found my own role in the aftermath. The healer's tents became my new domain. My gift, which had been a weapon and a shield during the battle, was now a tool for mending. I moved among the cots, not with bandages and poultices, but with a quiet presence. I would sit with a warrior who had lost a limb, and I would gently guide their spiraling despair toward the flicker of hope for a life that could still be lived. I would calm the nightmares of those who had seen too much, their terror a frantic, wild thing I could gently soothe. It was during this work that I felt it again, the echo of Vorian's corruption. It was fainter now, locked away deep beneath the fortress, but it was a persistent oil. 3 days after the battle, I was in the healing tent, holding the hand of a young Delta as he finally slipped into a peaceful sleep, when a wave of such profound, gut-wrenching anguish shot down the bond from Kaelin that I gasped aloud. It was followed by a fury so cold it burned. I excused myself and hurried through the fortress, following the pull of his distress. It led me not to the council chamber or the walls, but to the small, private garden near his quarters, a place I didn't know existed. It was a walled space, simple and wild, with hardy mountain flowers and a single ancient pine tree. He was standing with his back to me, his hands braced against the rough bark of the tree, his head bowed. His shoulders were rigid with tension. "Kaelin?" I said softly. He didn't turn, but his posture slumped slightly. "They found the traitor," he said, his voice hollow, stripped of all its usual power. My breath caught. "Who?" "Alaric, the keeper of the eastern gate." He finally turned to face me, and the raw pain in his eyes was a physical blow. Alaric was not a distant soldier. He was a beta Kaelin grew up with, a man he trusted implicitly. He confessed. Vorian promised him a position of power in the new order. He showed them the weak points in our defense. He was the reason they got so close. He trailed off, but I felt the rest of the sentence through the bond. "He was the reason you were almost taken." The betrayal was a poison worse than any southern blade. It wasn't just a strategic loss. It was a tear in the very fabric of the pack, a violation of the trust that held us together. I could feel Kaelin's worldview fracturing. If he could not trust those he had known his whole life, who could he trust? I walked to him, stopping an arm's length away. I didn't touch him. I just let my empathy wrap around him, a quiet, understanding presence. I didn't try to soothe the pain away. Some wounds needed to be felt. "This is the sickness," I whispered. "The corruption Vorian spreads. It doesn't just attack from the outside. It twists what is inside. It preys on ambition and fear." "How do I fight that, Ilara?" he asked, his voice ragged. "How do I protect us from an enemy that turns our own hearts against us?" I looked up at him, at the weight of his crown made manifest in the lines of grief on his face. "You fight it with this," I said, gesturing to the space between us. "With truth, with balance. You trusted me, a stranger. Your trust was not misplaced. Do not let one poisoned tree make you distrust the entire forest." He stared at me for a long moment, the storm in his eyes slowly clearing. The connection between us flared, warm and solid. He reached out, his fingers gently brushing a stray lock of hair from my cheek. The touch was electric, a spark of pure, undiluted connection after days of war and pain. It was the first time he had initiated such an intimate contact. "You are the wisest of us all," he murmured, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw before his hand fell away. "When I am lost in the shadows of being a king, you remind me of the man who wanted to be more. In that quiet garden, surrounded by the scars of our victory, we weren't Alpha and Omega. We were just Kaelin and Ilara, two people bound by a destiny they hadn't chosen, finding a quiet strength in each other that no enemy could breach. The war was far from over, the betrayal a fresh wound. Yet as we stood in a pool of mountain sunlight, I knew with deep certainty we would face it all together. The air in the council chamber was thick enough to choke on. It was our first formal meeting since the attack, and the victory had done little to ease the underlying tensions. If anything, it had sharpened them. The knowledge of Alaric's betrayal sat like a rotten carcass at the center of the table, and everyone was trying not to smell it. Elder Anya spoke first, her voice like the crack of ice. The traitor must be executed, publicly, as a warning. A swift execution looks like fear, Anya, countered a broad-shouldered alpha from the Stonefall pack, one of our allies. It says we cannot stomach the disease in our own ranks. We should make an example of him through prolonged punishment. He was a friend, Kaelin said, his voice quiet but cutting through the arguments. The room fell silent. His betrayal is a personal wound to this pack, but his punishment will be just, not brutal. We will not become what we are fighting against. I sat at Kaelin's right hand, as had become my place. I said nothing, but let my empathy drift through the room, reading the currents. I felt Elder Anya's rigid belief in harsh justice warring with a sliver of respect for Kaelin's stance. I felt the Stonefall Alpha's impatience, his desire for a show of strength. I felt the fear from others, the unspoken question. If Alaric could fall, who among us is next? The debate swirled around Vorian's fate. Some argued for his immediate execution to crush the southern threat once and for all. Others, more strategically minded, argued for using him as a bargaining chip to force a formal surrender from the remaining southern packs. He is a rabid animal, Goran the war commander growled. You cannot bargain with a beast. You put it down. Killing him makes him a martyr, Rydian countered calmly. It would unite the southern packs in a crusade of vengeance. We have won the battle, not the war. It was then that Elder Anya turned her flinty gaze to me. The Ghost Queen has been silent. What does our true Omega feel about this? All eyes shifted to me. The weight of their attention was immense. They were no longer looking at the girl from the alcove, but at the woman who had held the heart of the pack during the siege. Kaelin gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Your voice, he seemed to say. Use it. I took a slow breath, centering myself. I didn't look at the council members. I looked at the map on the table, imagining the lands beyond, the wolves who lived there. I cannot speak to strategy, I began, my voice clear in the hushed room. But I can speak to the sickness that Vorian carries. It is a poison that infects the spirit. If we kill him in anger, that poison spills onto us. It fuels the cycle. If we keep him locked in a dark cell, the poison festers in our home, a constant shadow in our foundation. What would you have us do, then? Elder Anya asked, her tone not challenging but genuinely curious. We do not kill the beast in a rage, I said, the idea forming as I spoke, guided by an instinct I trusted completely. And we do not let it rot in our basement. We cage it in sunlight, where all can see it for what it is. A puzzled silence met my words. Explain, Kaelin said softly. We put him on trial, I said. A public trial for all the northern territories, inviting witnesses from neutral and southern packs. We charge him with war and corruption, exposing the sickness we fight. We defeat his ideology, not just his army. A trial, Rydian murmured, a slow smile spreading across his face. We fight his lies with truth. We rob him of his power by exposing it. It is a risk, the Stonefall Alpha grumbled. It makes us look weak, uncertain, as if we cannot enforce our will. Does it? Kalen's voice rang out, strong and decisive now. He looked at me, his pride a warm sun in my chest. Or does it show a strength so profound that we are not afraid of the truth? It shows a pack confident in its balance, administering justice with clarity, not cruelty. The decision was made. As the council members filed out discussing logistics, I remained seated, trembling after speaking my truth. Kalen stayed, standing beside my chair. You continue to amaze me, he said, low and warm. A trial, it is the way of the Ilnega, to heal, reveal, unite. He offered his hand. I placed mine in his, and he pulled me gently to my feet. We stood, hand in hand, in the empty council chamber, ready for the uncharted, dangerous path ahead, feeling no fear. Only steady certainty. The days after the council's decision were a whirlwind of grim preparation. The Great Hall, once a battlefield and healing station, was being transformed into a court of justice. A raised dais for Kalen and the elders replaced the high table. A solitary, heavy chair bound with silver-laced iron sat in the center for the accused. Silver, which burns our kind, a necessary cruelty against Vorian's power. The fortress hummed with tense, anticipatory energy. Messengers were sent to every corner of the northern territories and neutral packs, carrying the unprecedented invitation, the Ghost Queen's trial. My idea had taken on a life of its own, and my name sat at its center, a constant pressure behind my eyes. I found myself drawn to the ancient archives, seeking solace in brittle pages of the past. I searched for precedents, any hint of how such a thing had been handled in the old, balanced days. The texts were silent on public trials, speaking of circles of elders, of the Alpha and Omega, mediating disputes with wisdom and empathy. We were creating a new tradition, and the responsibility felt immense. Kalen, sensing my anxiety through our bond, found me one afternoon, surrounded by open books and dust of centuries. "You are worrying," he said, his voice soft in the quiet of the archive. "What if I'm wrong? What if this gives him a platform? What if he twists the truth and wins sympathy? What if I have handed him the very weapon he needs to destroy us?" His faith in me was a shield. I took a shaky breath. "I'm to see him." His head snapped up, wary. "No, absolutely not," I insisted, my voice gaining strength. "I need to feel him up close to know what we truly face. My gift requires understanding." A silent battle warred in his eyes. The Alpha's protective instinct versus trust in my power. Finally, with reluctance, he nodded. "Rydian and I will be with you, and you will not get close." The dungeons were a world away from the sunlit archives, a place of perpetual chill and damp stone. The air was heavy with mildew and despair. Guards at the bottom of the spiral staircase bowed low as we approached, eyes wide at the sight of both their king and the Ghost Queen. Vorian's cell was the deepest, a cavern carved from the mountain. A single torch flickered outside heavy iron bars, casting dancing shadows. He sat on a bare stone bench, chains of steel and silver clinking with each breath. He looked up as we approached, his stagnant pond eyes finding me instantly. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. I ignored his taunts. I stood just beyond the bars, Rydian and Kaelin flanking me like twin sentinels. I closed my eyes, lowering my defenses, letting my empathy reach out to him. It was like plunging my hand into a pool of freezing black oil. The corruption was absolute. No fear, no regret, only vast, cold arrogance and a hunger so deep it was a void. He fed on the fear and pain of others. It was his sustenance. My spirit recoiled, and I felt Kaelin's hand on the small of my back, a steadying point of contact. "You feel it, don't you, little Omega?" Vorian whispered, leaning forward, the chains pulling taut. "The emptiness. You try to fill the world with your light, but you cannot comprehend the power of the dark. You and your true alpha. You play at balance, but you are children building a castle on a fault line." I opened my eyes, meeting his gaze. I did not flinch. "Your darkness is a prison of your own making, Vorium. You are the one in chains." He laughed, a dry, hacking sound. "These?" He rattled the manacles. "These are temporary. The chains you wear are far more interesting. The chain of hope, the chain of love." His eyes flicked to Kaelin, then back to me, gleaming with malicious insight. "They are so much heavier and so much easier to break. I look forward to watching you try to hold them up during our performance." His words were meant to frighten me, but they had the opposite effect. In that moment, feeling the utter desolate emptiness of his spirit, I understood him completely. He wasn't just an enemy to be defeated. He was a warning, a portrait of what happened when a wolf severed itself from the pack, from empathy, from love. He was the embodiment of the imbalance Kaelin's father had championed. I turned to Kaelin. "I've seen enough." As we walked away, Vorian's soft laughter followed us up the stairs. "Until the trial, my queen. I have so much to share with our audience." Back in the clean cistern. Cold air of the upper fortress. I leaned against a wall, my knees weak. "Are you all right?" Kaelin asked, his voice tight with concern. I looked at him, the image of Vorian's hollow eyes seared into my mind. "Yes," I said, and I meant it. Now I know he has no truth to tell, only lies to sow. And we have the truth. That is our strength. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, clear resolve. The trial would not be his stage. It would be our revelation. The Silvermane fortress swelled like a rising tide. Within a week, it was bursting at the seams with visitors. Alphas and betas from the most remote northern packs arrived, their curiosity overcoming their suspicion. Emissaries from the neutral territories came, their expressions carefully blank, their motives hidden. The air was thick with a cacophony of new scents and the low, constant rumble of hundreds of voices. The world was watching. I felt their presence like a constant pressure on my skin. The collective anxiety, the skepticism, the thinly veiled hostility from some quarters. It was a turbulent ocean of emotion that threatened to pull me under. I learned to build small mental shields, to let the waves wash over me without drowning in them. It was exhausting, but necessary. Liana helped me prepare for the trial, choosing a dress of deep, unadorned gray. "No finery," I had told her. "I am not a spectacle. I am a witness." The simple, severe lines of the gown felt like armor. The night before the trial, I couldn't sleep. The full moon, a cold, watchful eye, shone through my window. The fortress was never truly silent. But tonight, its usual noises were magnified. Every footstep, every distant laugh, every howl from the walls felt portentous. My mind raced, playing out 100 different terrible scenarios, in which Vorian twisted my words, swayed the crowd, and exposed us as fools. A soft knock came at my door. I knew who it was before I opened it. The bond hummed with his proximity. Kalen stood in the corridor, dressed in simple trousers and a tunic, looking more like the man from the garden than the king from the council chamber. He didn't speak, just held out his hand. I took it without hesitation. He led me not to his study or the archives, but up a narrow, winding staircase I had never seen before. It opened onto a small, secluded balcony high on the eastern wall, a secret perch overlooking the sleeping mountains and the star-dusted sky. The noise of the fortress faded to a distant murmur. "We used to come here when we were boys," he said softly. His gaze on the horizon, Rydian, Alaric, and I. We would dream of the packs we would lead. The pain of the betrayal was still there, a fresh wound in the memory, but it was tempered now by acceptance. We stood in silence for a long time, the chill night air a balm on my fevered thoughts. His presence was a quiet strength beside me, his hand still warm around mine. "I am afraid," I confessed into the stillness. The admission feeling both shameful and freeing. "So am I," he replied, his voice low. "I am afraid of failing them, of failing you." He turned to face me, his stormy eyes serious in the moonlight. "But my fear does not control me. Because I'm not alone." He lifted our joined hands. "This is the one thing Vorian cannot comprehend, the one weapon he has no defense against. He thinks our bond is a vulnerability. He does not understand. It is our greatest strength." Tears pricked my eyes, not of sadness, but of profound understanding. He was right. The connection between us was not a chain, as Vorian had sneered. It was a rote system, anchoring us both against the coming storm. "Tomorrow," I said, my voice steady now, "we show them all what it means to be a true alpha and a true omega. Not a hierarchy, a partnership." A slow, genuine smile spread across his face, the first I had seen in days. It transformed him, stripping away the weight of the crown and revealing the man beneath. "Partners," he agreed. He didn't try to kiss me. He didn't need to. The moment was too profound for that. The understanding that passed between us was more intimate than any physical touch. We were two halves of a whole, standing together in the quiet before the dawn, ready to face whatever came next. As we descended back into the fortress, the fear was gone. It had been replaced by a calm, steely certainty. Let the storm gather. Let Vorian speak his lies. We had the truth, and we had each other. That was an army he could never defeat. The great hall was packed to the point of bursting. The air was hot, thick with the scent of packed bodies and simmering tension. Every rank, from the highest alpha to the lowest omega, had found a place, their faces a sea of expectation. The emissaries from other packs were given seats of honor at the front, their expressions unreadable masks. I stood slightly behind Kalen's throne on the dais, my hands clasped tightly in front of me, my gray dress feeling like a shroud. A hush fell as the guards brought Vorian in. He walked with a chilling theatrical slowness, his chains clinking a grim rhythm. He had been cleaned and given fresh clothes, but nothing could disguise the corruption that clung to him. He looked out over the crowd, not with shame, but with a kind of predatory appraisal, as if calculating the fear in the room. When his eyes met mine, he gave a slight, mocking bow. Kalen stood. His voice, when he spoke, was clear and carried to the farthest corner of the hall. Devoid of anger, filled only with the weight of authority. Vorian, alpha of the Shadowfang pack, you stand accused of breaking sacred truce, of waging war upon a sovereign territory, of sowing corruption, and of conspiring to assassinate your rightful king. How do you answer? Vorian smiled, a slow, ugly thing. I answer that I recognize no king but strength. I answer that your sacred truce is a fiction created by the weak to protect themselves from the strong. He turned to address the crowd, his voice taking on a charismatic, oily tone. He speaks of corruption. Look at your own king. He parades a low-born omega as his equal. He seeks to overturn the natural order that has guided our kind for generations. This ghost queen, he spat the name toward me. She is the corruption, a symbol of the weakness that will be the downfall of the North. A ripple of unease went through the crowd. This was his strategy, to turn the trial on its head, to make us the accused. Kalen remained impassive. The floor is yours, Vorian. Present your defense. And so he began. He spoke not of battle plans or borders, but of philosophy, of the right of the strong to rule the weak. He twisted the old stories, claiming that the legend of the true Omega was a fairy tale invented by failing bloodlines to cling to power. He painted Kalen as a sentimental fool, swayed by a pretty face and ancient superstitions, and me as a cunning opportunist. I listened, my empathy stretched over the hall. I could feel his words slithering into the minds of the listeners, finding purchase in their own secret fears and prejudices. I felt the doubt growing, the uncertainty. He was a master manipulator, and he was using the truth of our bond against us. When he finally finished, a smug silence hung in the air. He had not denied his actions. He had justified them as the natural right of a superior wolf. It was then that Kalen turned to me. His gaze was a question and a command. Now. Elara, now is the time. I stepped forward. Every eye in the hall followed my movement. I felt 1,000 different emotions pressing in on me. Hostility, curiosity, hope, fear. I walked down from the dais and stopped in the center of the floor, facing Vorian. I did not look at the crowd. I looked only at him. You speak of the natural order, I began, my voice quiet but carrying, amplified by the hall's acoustics and the profound silence. But you do not understand nature. In nature, there is no lone wolf that thrives. The pack survives because the strong protect the weak, because the swift hunt for the slow, because the old teach the young. It is a circle, Vorian, not a ladder. You have broken the circle. You have made yourself an island, and islands are eventually swallowed by the sea. He scoffed. Pretty words from a pretty mouth. They change nothing. They change everything, I said, my voice gaining strength. Because they are the truth, and you are afraid of the truth. That is why you must lock it away, or kill it, or twist it into lies. I took a step closer, ignoring the warning tension in Kaylin's posture behind me. You called me the heart of the matter. You were right. I turned now to face the crowd, my arms spread slightly. I am the heart, and a pack without a heart is just a body. It may be strong, but it cannot love. It cannot hope. It cannot create. It can only consume and destroy until there is nothing left to consume, and it turns on itself. I let my empathy flow out, not to calm, but to connect. I let them feel my sincerity, my conviction, the pure, unshakable truth of what I was saying. Is that the future you want? A world of lonely islands constantly at war? Or do you want a pack, a family, a future? I turned back to Vorian. You feel nothing for them? You see them as tools or obstacles. I feel every one of them. Their fear is my fear. Their hope is my hope. That is not a weakness. That is a strength you will never know. The silence in the hall was absolute. I could feel the shift. The doubt Vorian had sown was being burned away by the simple, blazing truth of connection. I had not argued his points. I had rendered them irrelevant. Vorian's smug mask finally cracked. He saw that he was losing them. His eyes narrowed, and he took a sudden, lurching step toward me, his chains rattling. You think your feelings can stop a claw? Can block a fang? He snarled, his voice dripping with venom. In that moment, I didn't flinch. I stood my ground, a small figure in gray, facing the embodiment of corruption. No, I said calmly, but his can. And as if on cue, Kaylin was there. He didn't shift. He didn't roar. He simply moved to stand beside me, his presence a wall of unbreakable will between Vorian and me. He didn't even look at the Southern Alpha. He looked at the crowd. The heart and the sword, Kaylin said, his voice ringing with finality. One cannot exist without the other. This is the balance. This is the truth Vorian seeks to destroy. The question is no longer his guilt. The question is, which future do you choose? He didn't need to call for a vote. The verdict was in the air, in the settled certainty of the packs, in the defeated slump of Vorian's shoulders. The trial was over. The truth had spoken, and it had won. The silence in the great hall was not the quiet of uncertainty, but the deep, resonant hush of a truth being accepted. I could feel it washing over the crowd, a cleansing tide. The oily doubt Vorian had poured into their minds was being scoured away, replaced by a dawning, solid understanding. They had seen the stark contrast, the hollow, consuming hunger of the Southern Alpha against the united, generative strength of their king and his Omega. There was no contest. Kaylin did not return to his throne. He remained standing beside me, a pillar of silent authority. He looked to Elder Anya, who rose from her seat on the dais, her flinty eyes clear and decisive. The accused has been heard, she announced, her voice cutting through the stillness. And his defense has been found to be no defense at all, but a confession of a corrupted spirit. Her gaze swept the room, meeting the eyes of the other alphas and emissaries. This council, bearing witness for all the northern territories, finds Vorian of Shadowfang guilty on all charges. No one stirred. There was no outburst. The verdict was as inevitable as the sunrise after a long night. The sentence, Elder Anya continued, her voice dropping into a graver register, is not death. For death would be a release and a catalyst for the martyrdom he seeks. She looked at Kaelin, then at me, a flicker of respect in her ancient eyes. The sentence is exile, permanent and absolute. A murmur rippled through the hall. Exile was a fate some considered worse than death, to be cut off from the pack, from the shared spirit, to become a true lone wolf, adrift and anchorless. You will be taken beyond the sacred mountains to the barren lands where no pack runs, Kaelin declared, his voice echoing with finality. Your connection to the pack spirit will be formally severed in the old way. You will live out your days alone, a monument to the fate of those who choose the path of corruption over the path of balance. Vorian's face, for the first time, showed genuine emotion. It was not fear, but a profound, seething fury. The sentence was a spiritual execution. He would be a ghost in truth, stripped of everything that gave a wolf meaning. He was rendered harmless, not by a cage of iron, but by a cage of emptiness. This is not mercy, he spat, his voice trembling with rage. It is not meant to be, I said, my voice soft, but carrying in the utter quiet. It is justice. It is the natural consequence of your choices. You chose to be an island. Now you will have your wish. The guards moved forward to take him away. As they led him, stumbling from the hall, he twisted his head to look back at us one last time. The hatred in his eyes was a tangible force, but it was impotent. He had been defeated not by a superior army, but by a superior idea. The moment the doors closed behind him, the tension in the hall shattered. It was not replaced by cheers, but by a collective, deep exhalation. The storm had passed. The leaders of the various packs began to converge on the dais, not with demands or arguments, but with offers. The Western neutral alpha, a stern-faced man who had watched the entire proceeding with a guarded expression, was the first to approach Kaelin. Your way, this balance, he said, his voice gruff. It has strength I did not see before. The Western pack would discuss an alliance, a true one. One by one, they came. Promises of loyalty, of shared patrols, of open borders. The trial had not just neutralized an enemy, it had forged a coalition. The northern territories were uniting, not under the threat of a sword, but under the promise of a heart. I stood slightly apart, watching Kaelin receive them. His demeanor kingly, yet open. The weight on his shoulders seemed to have lightened, the lines of grief and worry smoothed by this hard-won victory. Through our bond, I felt not triumph, but a profound, humble gratitude. Later, as the hall finally emptied, we found ourselves alone once more in the cavernous space. The echoes of the day's events seemed to linger in the air. He came to stand before me, the torchlight catching the silver in his dark hair. You were magnificent, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You did not fight his lies. You made them irrelevant. We did it, I corrected softly. The sword and the heart. He reached out, his fingers gently brushing against the silver disc of my pendant, then tracing the line of my collarbone. The touch was feather light, but it sent a shock of warmth through my entire body. My wolf pressed forward, not in yearning, but in contentment, in completion. The challenges are not over, he murmured, his stormy eyes holding mine. There will be other threats, other battles. I know, but the foundation is laid, he said, because of you. He didn't kiss me. The moment was too sacred for that. Instead, he simply took my hand, lacing his fingers through mine. We stood there in the quiet of the great hall, hand in hand, the Alpha and the Omega, the king and the queen who had been found in the shadows. The past was settled. The future was uncertain. But the present, ... This perfect, peaceful moment of shared victory and understanding was everything. We had faced the darkness and not been consumed. Together we had brought the dawn. The weeks that followed the trial were a time of renewal. Like the first green shoots pushing through scorched earth, the fortress, once a place of tension and fear, hummed with a new, purposeful energy. The visiting packs did not leave immediately. Instead, their leaders stayed to draft the first formal accords of the Northern Alliance, a treaty built not on dominance, but on mutual protection and the principles of balance Kaelin and I embodied. I found my place in this new world, not as a figurehead, but as an active participant. My chamber was no longer just a room. It became a place where wolves of all ranks felt they could come. A Gamma would arrive, nervous and stammering, with an idea for improving the watermills. An Omega, emboldened by my presence, would whisper of a gifted child who showed signs of unusual empathy. I listened to them all, feeling the health of the pack in these small, honest interactions. I was the heart, and they were bringing their blood to me. Kaelin and I settled into a rhythm that was both formal and deeply intimate. Our days were filled with council meetings and strategy sessions, but our evenings were often spent in his study or my solar, discussing the ancient texts or simply sitting in a comfortable silence. The bond between us, a quiet, steady hum of shared existence. The echo pain was gone, replaced by a constant, low-level awareness of each other. A comforting knowledge of the other's presence, like a hearth fire burning in the next room. One evening, he came to my door with a rare, almost boyish excitement in his eyes. "Come with me," he said. Offering his hand, he led me out of the fortress, past the guards who bowed deeply, and into the moon-drenched forest. We walked in silence along a path I now knew led to the sacred clearing where the first Alpha and Omega pairs had bonded. But he stopped before we reached it, in a smaller glade where a crystal-clear stream gurgled over smooth stones. "This was my mother's favorite place," he said, his voice soft with memory. "She was a beta, kind and gentle. My father, he broke her spirit. She died while I was still young." He looked at me, the moonlight silvering his profile. "I think she would have liked you. She would have been glad to know that the old ways, the true ways, were not completely lost." The confession was a gift. He was sharing not just his kingdom with me, but his past, his wounds. My mother would have been proud of the man you've become, I replied. The king you are. He turned to face me fully, taking both my hands in his. The air between us crackled with the importance of the moment. The playful energy was gone, replaced by a solemn, profound intensity. Elara, he began. His voice low and resonant. The bond between us is the greatest truth I have ever known. It has made me a better alpha, a better king, a better man. I do not need a ceremony to know that you are my fated partner. My other half. He took a deep breath. But I want to give you one. Not for politics, not for tradition. For us. My heart swelled, beating a frantic, joyful rhythm against my ribs. I could feel the sincerity of his words. The love that flowed from him to me through our connection. A warm, golden river. The winter solstice is in 3 days' time, he continued. The traditional night for the bonding of a true alpha and true omega. A night of longest darkness before the return of the light. He squeezed my hands. Will you bond with me, Elara? Fully and completely? Will you stand with me not just as my queen, but as my mate for all our days? Tears of pure, unadulterated joy streamed down my face. There was no hesitation, no doubt. The path from the alcove to this moonlit glade had been long and terrifying, but it had led me here to this man, to this destiny. Yes, I whispered, my voice choked with emotion. Yes, Kaelin, 1,000 times yes. The smile that broke across his face was brighter than the moon. He pulled me into his arms. And this time, he did kiss me. It was not a kiss of frantic passion, but of a slow, deep, and perfect claiming. It was a seal on a promise, a beginning and an end all at once. Our wolves, finally in perfect accord, sang a silent song of joy within us. 3 nights later, the entire pack gathered in the main courtyard, their faces upturned to the starry sky. The longest night had come. Kaelin and I stood in the sacred clearing, surrounded only by the ancient pines and the witness of the full moon. We wore simple white robes, symbols of a new beginning. There was no hunt. Ours was complete. There was no exchange of blood. Our spirits were already mingled. Instead, we stood before the stone altar, hand in hand, and spoke the ancient vows directly from our hearts to each other. By the moon that watches, Kaelin began, his eyes holding mine. And the earth that holds us, I continued. My voice steady. By the pack that needs us, he said. And the bond that joins us, I finished. Together, our voices united as one, we spoke the final vow. We are 2 wolves, 1 path, 2 souls, 1 journey. From this night until the last star falls. As the words faded, a profound silence fell over the forest. And then a power unlike anything I had ever felt surged between us, through us. It was not a shock, but a completion. A circuit dormant for generations was now fully active. I could feel his thoughts as clearly as my own, his love a constant sun in my soul. I could feel the entirety of the pack, not as a chaotic sea of emotion, but as a harmonious chorus, their well-being a song I could now consciously conduct. We were one, truly and completely. We turned from the altar and walked back to the fortress, to the waiting pack. As we emerged from the trees into the courtyard, We did not need to speak. Kalen threw back his head and let out a long, clear howl. It was a sound of triumph, of love, of a new beginning. I joined my voice to his, our howls intertwining, a perfect melody of strength and heart. And from the courtyard, from the walls, from the very mountains themselves, the pack answered. It was a sound that shook the foundations of the night, a symphony of hope and unity that echoed into the dawn of a new age. The Ghost Queen was a memory. I was Alara, the true Omega, the mate of the true Alpha, the heart of a united pack. The girl from the alcove was gone. In her place stood a queen, and her story was just beginning. And so, beneath the solstice moon, a new era for the Silvermane pack began. The bond was sealed, the alliance was forged, but the world is vast, and shadows linger even in the brightest dawn. The story of Kalen and Alara is far from over. If you wish to follow their journey, to see the challenges their bonded rule will face and the new threats that gather on the horizon, please like, subscribe, and most of all, comment below. Your support tells us you want more. Tell us what you thought of the Ghost Queen's transformation. Let us know if you're ready for part 2. Your comment guides the next chapter. Comment now.